Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
We all talk about the church in Germany almost too much on this channel, but they're very busy trying to rewrite the rules of the faith, the actual faith itself, the moral teachings of the church. They use the McCarrick problem in their own country. Problem where priests were doing evil things to the most vulnerable, and then were getting away with it because, for at least for a while, because the bishops were hiding them. These same bishops, or their heirs, really, are now saying that it's the faith that's the problem, and so the faith needs to get with the times. They promote all sorts of errors. James Martin's sin, the most liberal reading of Fiducious Supplicans imaginable, a hierarchy run by the laity, where the laity get to determine who gets to graduate from seminary, who gets ordained a priest, who is allowed to enter into seminary, and to give the final stamp of approval on a bishop before the Pope can actually consecrate him a bishop. It's madness in Germany, to the point where recently, as I reported on this channel, a German priest decided he was not going to associate with the church in Germany anymore. He wanted to remain a Catholic priest, not a German synodal lay priest. But it's those crises that are the excuse for it. Not all that different than claiming that in your country the church's teachings on morality don't work for one reason or another. Instead of putting the onus on the institution, the people, the human element of the church, to have the courage and to pray and fast for the grace to have the courage to stand up to a disordered world and teach the teachings of the faith, they instead seek to align themselves with the world. And the German bishops have a website, a news website called katholisch.de. It is the official news website for the Catholic Church in Germany. What they publish there, the opinions expressed in those articles, are approved by the bishops. It is effectively their opinions. And there is one area of heretical revolution that they push that actually gets a lot of support for Catholics who otherwise are fairly orthodox in their leanings. And that is on the subject of priests being married. There's this idea that we could solve all the impurity problems in the church if priests would only get married. I laugh because if you've ever looked at the statistics of the McCarrick problem, you'll find that the number one place it happens is in the home. That's the number one place it happens. And then after that, it's public schools and Protestant churches, and then the Catholic Church after that, generally speaking. Married priests aren't going to solve anything. But the German priests, the German bishops, are now making their ask. Headline from katholisch.de. Theologian calls on German bishops to ordain married men. We'll turn to that article in a moment. The Vatican started floating this idea under Francis at the Pan-Amazon Synod under the title of viri probati. These would be older married men whose children are grown, or at least old enough to not need their dads around all the time, who could be ordained as married priests. They were going to try to experiment with this in South America and a couple other places. Not a lot of reporting on what's happened with that since then. I suspect they've run into some very basic problems with this idea. Many of the biggest opponents to a married priesthood in the church are actually priests today. And actually, I've had conversations with Eastern priests who are vehemently against this. And they are the ones who have the right to be married. Some of them are married priests, and they say that their lives are completely complicated beyond reason now because they are a married priest. And they've noticed little effects like the laity in their parish is not wanting to go to confession with them now that they're married. Almost as if there's a subconscious distrust that the seal of confession will be honored. And a whole host of other things. What really the church needs to do is to double down on purity and morality. Take a firm hand and a firm stand on these things. You can be pastoral, perhaps, in how it is you're dealing with laity, but the church needs to bear witness to the truth of the gospel, even when it's uncomfortable. In fact, especially when it's uncomfortable. And anything having to do with the sins of the flesh is a very uncomfortable topic for people today. So here's the Germans their latest ravings. Quote, Ulrich Luke calls on German bishops to have the courage to ordain married men. In a commentary on the Church's online portal, Kirche und Leben, the theologian writes, quote, what would happen if 10 German bishops, in their pastoral duty to care for the Eucharist, were to ordain 5 married, theologically well-trained men to each to the priesthood on the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul in 2027? Now let's pause there. What does he mean by theologically well-trained? Well, this is the German bishops we're talking about here, so there's only one thing that they mean by that, and they mean those who are steeped in the German synodal way, which is a form of hyper-modernism. That's what they mean. Let's not pretend otherwise, because a truly theologically well-trained person will understand why the Church phased out married priests in the West back in like the 9th century or whenever it happened. According to canon law, the candidate for ordination must be a baptized man, explains Luke. This means that the 50 married priests would then be ordained validly but not legally. He doubts that Rome would remove the 10 bishops and the 50 married priests from their offices. He's absolutely right about that, by the way. Since, on the other hand, married Protestant pastors who have converted to Catholicism are ordained as Catholic priests, we'll put an asterisk next to that. That's not always true, but sometimes they are. He simply sees no theological justification for this. This church will block itself if it lacks the courage to embrace different speeds of development, the theologian writes. That could be your catchphrase for modernism today. This church will block itself if it lacks the courage to embrace different speeds of development, meaning if it doesn't change things. Courage is an essential skill for shepherds to protect their flocks, he says. Don't the shepherds of the church, especially those who call themselves chief shepherds, need to be more courageous? Adds Luke. Is what we are experiencing among the bishops with these ever-new pastoral and structural adjustments rather better than described as cowardice in the face of a friend in Rome? According to Luke, courage, even in the face of Rome, would be suitable criterion for selecting new bishops. In other words, it would be a suitable criterion to make it so that someone who becomes a bishop in Germany, if they are willing to defy the Pope on these things. That's what that means. That they don't care. Pope Leo could issue a document tomorrow formally reminding people that they can't ordain married men in the Latin West, and he could even put in an anathema statement to it, and they would not care. The theologian sees the ordination of married men as a way to respond to what he identifies as Eucharist-free zones. He believes the declining number of priests is currently acutely endangering pastoral care. He is right about that. The theologian sees the diaconate and the ordination of women as further issues on the church's agenda that needs to be addressed. Of course he does. You never get one without the other anymore. If you're worried about Eucharist and pastoral free zones where you can't get the sacraments, I got a better recommendation for you. Invite the FSSP and the SSPX into your dioceses. It's as simple as that. If you want to stop preaching heresy from the AMBO, preach the good old-fashioned Catholic faith, like in that old-time religion. Give it a shot. You'd be surprised how well it works out in terms of pastoral care and getting men to want to be priests again by simply actually offering the actual faith. It turns out people don't want the imitation. They want the real deal. Don't be surprised by this. Don't be surprised. Those errors are always linked together. I ask you today to pray for everyone I spoke about in this video today. Pray for them. Don't get angry with them. Or if you do, righteous indignation is a natural thing. And if you don't feel righteous indignation in the face of error, there's a problem. But instead of letting that anger eat at you, use it to drive you to prayer for the conversion of souls, or for mercy on the church, or whatever it is that your conscience dictates when it comes to praying for the church. But always turn to prayer instead of marinating in anger. I am curious what you think about this. So let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It absolutely does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. If you've ever thought about supporting the work we do here at Return to Tradition, options are always in the description box below, including that subscribe plus button. That's the old join button, or a Patreon subscribe star. All options asked for by viewers of this channel, and they do help keep these daily messages coming. But pray for these bishops. They need them. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.